Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In this thread, reasons you think your house is haunted. I literally always hear people walking around in the upstairs loft that's been abandoned for years. Loud banging and walking upstairs while I'm downstairs and no one else is home. I've seen shadowy shapes darting around in my peripheral vision. More importantly, I saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes standing in my backyard, staring at the house. When I went out to yell at the spirit to get off my lawn, she had vanished. I've also seen a white misty shape out on the sun porch, and I hear whispering voices sometimes at night. I'm also sometimes awakened by voices calling my name at night.
As for my house, I always hear something moving around in my attic. It's split up in two parts, and the other part, which is closed off, has a door. The door is always locked, but every time I go up there, the door is open with just a crack. Looks and feels like someone is staring at you, too. Really creepy. And I'm the only one in this house that goes up there. Also, we have this small rental house in the back. It's abandoned now, but whenever I was alone inside of it, that shit scared me. No matter where you went, it felt like you were being watched. It had this door that led out into the tiny garage, and I swear I've seen shadows pass over it a few times. The outside garage door, however, is padlocked. I often saw people or heard someone moving around inside the house when I was a little kid. I'd go tell my mom, and she would tell me to wait in the house and watch. If she didn't come back in 5 minutes, I'd have to call the cops. Scary shit.
When I was little, I used to hear someone in heavy boots walking in the kitchen. For a while I assumed it was an intruder, but by morning, nothing had happened. After a while, I just convinced myself I was hearing things. Then I had all these weird experiences when I was a kid, like the TV being on and being staticky, but playing marching band music, and I climbed out of my bunk to turn it off, and when I got down, the music was gone, and before I could turn it off, it turned itself off. And I felt things brushing my hair off my shoulder and whispering into my ear, but no one was there. The worst part of it all is that we have a very small attic that no one has been in at least since my parents moved in, and you can only get into it through the ceiling, and my closet is the only entrance to it. When I was little, I would scare myself shitless wondering if there were dead bodies up there, or like zombies.
My current house is not haunted at all. As for my old house, it's an entirely different story. We moved there when I was 5 years old, in 1989, and we had to rebuild the house almost from scratch because it was in very bad shape, paint it, change the gas piping, etc. As we had been told, the previous owner of the house had been murdered by one of his tenants during an argument. 20 years before we moved, he was struck with a hammer to the head. From then on, the house remained in hands of his heirs, abandoned, until we bought it and moved in. Among the many things we had to change, there was the bath, which had some nasty red stains which at the time my mom said were from rust. In the 11 years I lived there, I experienced a lot of weird shit. From locked windows opening for themselves, to weird noises and wood creaking. But what freaked me out the most were my cats. They were terrified of going to the backyard. Sometimes we would be having dinner at the kitchen, facing the backyard, and the cat would suddenly rush to the window and start scratching it and screaming desperately to get in. We would let him in, and he would run into my parents' bedroom and hide under the bed. Then he would go back to the window and stare at the backyard with wide eyes and a terrified look, staring at something or somebody we could not see. Now, I never saw anything strange, but my mom claimed to have seen ghosts on 3 occasions. On 2 of them, she claimed she saw a floating white light in the backyard, but only for a couple of seconds, and this did not scare her much. On the 3rd occasion, however, she swears seeing a shadow-hooded figure crossing the hallway that led to the stairs, crossing from wall to wall and disappearing. She says that thing looked like a shadowy figure made of black smoke, and that she was chilled to the bone, somehow knowing that it was an evil entity.
Now I have a story for you, X. It's not that horrifying, however it scared me. About a year or so ago, I moved to my grandfather's house. My dad overdosed, so there was nowhere else to go. My grandfather had one of his work buddies living in the house. He was a nice man. I lived upstairs. Me and my grandfather's friend shared the bathroom. He lived in a room right next to mine. I liked him and smoked with him on occasion. After getting to know him more, I then found out that he was going through a divorce. Also was his reason for living with us. About a month of living there, I went to one of my friend's houses for the night. However, when I got back, I was told that he had took his life in the bathroom the night before. I decided to sleep on the couch until everything was cleaned up. He had sliced his wrists in the bathroom, and then I guess he tried to walk into his bedroom afterwards. There was a small amount of blood in the hallway. After everything was cleaned out and his wife and kid came to our house to claim his stuff, I went up to my room. I was on the phone with one of my buddies and started going up the stairs. Now, I have never been scared shitless like this in my whole life. I stood by the top of the stairs and looked over at the bathroom after hearing a noise. The bathroom door was turning and rattling for over a minute as I stood there scared half to death. It looked like someone was trying to get the door opened and get out. Being the coward, I dropped the phone and ran down the stairs and told my grandfather that there was someone in the bathroom. My grandfather grabbed his baseball bat and headed upstairs. He looked in the bathroom, nobody was there. After checking the rooms and closets upstairs, he asked me what I saw. I told him and he just said,
It must have been the wind. Your mind is just playing tricks because you know he died in there.
However, after that he went back downstairs and I stayed in my room guarding my pets. It was about a half an hour until I worked up the nerve to go inside the bathroom. I opened the door and it seemed that the window was closed and locked. There's no other ventilation in that room. I looked up at the ceiling at one point and there was still a small amount of dried blood by the light. I decided later that night to stick a pad of paper and a pen in that bathroom and said, if you have anything to say, then write it down. The next morning I went up to see if anything had been written down. Sad to say, there was nothing. I haven't had any more paranormal experiences after that. Well, there's my story. It may suck, but hey.
Bizarre thing that happened when I still lived with my mom a while ago. She wore this mouth guard that fit against her teeth to correct her jaw, as she had a nasty crossbite. One day, said mouth guard goes missing. It happened to be incredibly expensive, as it had to be custom made. The next week or so is spent tearing the house apart looking for it. My brother and a friend of his even had to search through garbage. Then, one day, she and I were discussing something. I don't remember what exactly, and we walked past the couch in her room, looked down at the same time, and there it was, on the cushion she sat on every day as she put on her shoes. We both broke out in laughter and shat bricks simultaneously.
At my old house, 2 of the bedrooms were set up at opposite ends of a hallway so that the doorways faced each other. I had my bed set up so that my feet were pointed toward the doorway of my older sister's room. I was around 9 years old, and I was having one of the weirdest nightmares I think I've ever had. I can only describe it as those shapes that are burned into your retinas for a while after staring into a bright light. But they had shape. The one I distinctly remember was one that looked like the jaw of a chain chomp charging at me. I can still distinctly remember the crunching sound it made, and I felt this sort of shock when the teeth crunched. Out of the blue, I distinctly hear, "Ryan, what are you doing?" in my mom's voice. I woke up and looked down the hallway and see her standing in my sister's doorway looking at me, but something was different. She looked blurry, like she was surrounded by fog or something. Then I noticed that she was taller than the door frame. Just as I noticed that she morphed into some white amoeba thing and just floated there. Shitting bricks, I ran over to the TV and turned it on for light, and when I looked out of the door again, the thing was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night watching TV until the rest of the house woke up. That was the longest different strokes marathon of my life. Some years later, I learned that around that time while my sister was at a sleepover, some girl got out a Ouija board and they all used it, and after that she was seeing weird shit.
A few years back I was living in an odd duplex of a house. From the street it looked like one of the usual 1920s style houses that can be found throughout the north side of the suburb. However, the upper floor had its own kitchen and bathroom, and the only entrance was through a back door next to the first floor's back door. Anyhow, I moved into the upstairs unit after leaving my cousin's house, and everything was more or less fine to begin with. There was the odd case of pencils rolling along tables and doors opening on their own, but I chalked it up to the old house being old and settling. Then I started waking up in the morning to the sound of the first floor's front screen door being slammed shut. This was odd, as the family renting the first floor unit never used the front door. They even had a sign out front saying, "Please use the back door." I figured someone was using the front door and didn't think that much of it. Then the downstairs family moved out, and the screen door slamming continued. Things got weirder. There was the odd knock on the walls, and one morning I woke up to hear faint voices coming from, well, somewhere. I remember hearing a name, something like Walter. It wasn't the neighbors, I never heard them, nor was it anyone downstairs as there wasn't anyone there. Maybe it was night terrors, but in my 30-plus years on this earth I've yet to experience anything near to that experience. Sadly, the anticlimactic ending is that a friend of mine moved up from Florida and we moved to a newer, bigger apartment. One where I never repeated the screen door experience at. Now I have a new house of my own, and everything seems kosher here. At least for now.
I've also experienced similar shit. Not in the house I live in, as it's only about 18 years old, but I used to work in a restaurant/bed and breakfast that was over a century old. My boss, the head chef, was a real asshat and liked to schedule dishwashers into the late hours of the night, regardless of whether or not this was breaking child labor laws. I was 16 at the time. This resulted in a lot of times where I was the only one in the kitchen, or even the entire downstairs of the building, very late at night. Now, I was friends with the owner's daughter at the time I worked there, and she used to tell me all sorts of creepy little stories about complaints her father would get regarding voices, banging, crying, etc. during the night. It was fun to hear about, but I never really believed her much. I was, and still am, mostly a skeptic regarding the paranormal. Doesn't stop me from lurking here for creepypasta, though. Anyway, on multiple occasions, I would be washing dishes at midnight or later, when I would feel like I was being watched. I remember distinctly, at least 2 or 3 times where I would look up upon feeling this, see someone's feet in front of me, and snap my head up, only for them to disappear. Loads of little shit like this happened, and it was creepy, but not creepy enough to make me shit brick. Once, though, I was in the lounge area on the bottom floor of the restaurant late at night. My friends were upstairs, and I had forgotten my hoodie on the couch in the lounge. There was a pool table in there, and behind it, a floor-to-ceiling mirror. We always used to get creeped out by it. That night, when I reached for my hoodie on the couch, I glanced up at the mirror and saw a man dressed in 20s-era clothing, holding a pipe, and staring at me with his brow furrowed. Hoodie in hand, I snapped my head around, quick enough to make my neck sore in the morning, and whatever it was wasn't there anymore. I immediately shat multiple brie/x/ and sprinted out, through the area he had been standing. I distinctly felt a chill as I ran through. Probably my mind was just playing tricks on me. Like I said, I'm still a skeptic, and I've always had an active imagination. Still though, that was some scary shit.
I had just been weaned off the bottle and was finally getting used to sippy cups. But on occasion I'd still yearn for the old comfort that I once got for a bottle, which wasn't odd I don't think for that age, but whatever. Anyway, so after a week or so I'd begin to wake up and look around with the feeling of that rubber teat between my tiny teeth, and the feeling as if a cool bottle had been between my hands. It would soon go away however, and I would just go right back to cuddling under my Barney sheets. But one night the yearning returned and I got restless, whimpering softly as I lay in my dimly lit room, reaching up as if someone was going to hand me a bottle. But as I did this I felt a cool plastic tube handed to me, opening my eyes and looking up to see a smiling young woman, who looked to be around late 20s early 30s, pregnant. One hand rested on her belly as the other handed me the bottle. Now for some reason this soothed me deeply and I just took the bottle and smiled up at her. She smiled back and leaned down, touched my cheek and whispered something to me. I had brought the bottle to my lips, but as I was about to suck on it it vanished and the lady faded. I fell asleep as soon as she was gone. I know it's really detailed, but that's exactly how I remember it, and one of the only things I do remember from being so young. It's not scary, but it's still weird. I occasionally wake up and can feel a gentle hand on my cheek and a kind whisper, but I haven't seen her since that day. It's still comforting to think about it sometimes, but weird that it was a pregnant ghost. I did some research and a very pregnant woman had gotten into a car accident on my road. She died instantly. Maybe she died in her 3rd trimester and is using me as her could-have been child? I don't know. What do you think, /x/?
I lived in a creepy house when I was little. There was a room at the end of the upstairs hallway that had a door to the attic. This is where my brother had his room. After my brother moved out, I found a journal of his in a drawer, and every single page had increasingly frantic scribbles about the scratches that he heard all night long on the other side of the attic door. When I was still very little, my mother remembers me holding avid conversations in the corner of my room. As I grew older, I lost this imaginary friend, but became increasingly aware that the sound of breathing was coming from that same corner. My mother would often run upstairs, rush into my room and ask me, "What's wrong?" only to find me peacefully asleep. More than once, she heard the sound of a child painfully screaming "Mommy" coming from my room at night. She was the only one who heard this. I once woke up in the middle of the night and saw a small figure standing in my doorway. I forced myself to go back to sleep, and never slept with the door open again. I still can't. My sister saw the same figure multiple times. I would hear the sounds of men playing poker downstairs when everyone was asleep, usually followed by the crashing of footsteps coming the stairs to my room, where they stopped. A friend of mine was sleeping over. We had gone to bed. During the night, she got out of bed, stood in that same corner of my room, and went into hysterics. She was still asleep, but she was sobbing, screaming. I asked her what was wrong and tried to wake her up. A few minutes later, she stopped and calmly got back into bed. In the morning, she never remembered doing such a thing. My sister once left all her dolls in my room after playing with them. My mother, cleaning, had propped them up on my dresser. I woke up the next morning and found all of their heads turned backward.
When I was 4, I had nothing but fond memories of my old one-story house. It really was the greatest thing to me as, at the time, I was obsessed with Dalmatians. So, due to this, my parents not only gave my room a custom paint job of black spots over white, but they also bought a Dalmatian. My second brother was due soon, and, as my parents knew, I wasn't very good with babies. I acted very angry at my first brother's arrival. It took me a while to calm down. Now, during this time I was given the least attention, and being the spoiled little brat I was, I started becoming angry again. Or so my parents say. I never recall any of this. My neighbor, who was old, motherly, and loved to craft little decorations, had me over her house all the time in order to make me feel better. For a little 4-year-old, I was more depressed than I should have been. She baked me cookies, talked to me, all that wonderful stuff. She even made me a little Dalmatian decoration to hang on my window. Eventually, as this went on, my grandfather decided to sell his home and move to his new wife's house, which is a while away. He gave my dad a great deal on a still small, but nicer 2-story house. My dad buys it and we move. The house is a mess, wires hanging from ceilings, dusty, an attic that can only be accessed from the closet that creaked. Creepy on its own to a 4-year-old, but it gets worse. Further down the block is yep, you guessed it, Indian burial ground among a few Civil War graves. Starting as soon as we start renovating, I keep awakening during the middle of the night to a sort of stabbing feeling in my back. I want to scream, but I can't bring myself to do this. A couple years go by and every night it's the same thing. I never say a thing to my parents. It gets worse and worse, to the point where I'm awakened at least 4 times a night to these strange stabbing feelings. It was so bad sometimes I could swear I heard strange noises as if someone were talking to someone else in another language. A couple years and nights of no sleep and terror later, I'm in my teens. I receive medication for insomnia, yet I'm still awakened by the stabbing sort of feeling, voices, and now shadows of people as I awake. My mom rummages through a closet and finds the little Dalmatian wall hanger my neighbor, who was dead for a while now, made and hung it on my window, just because. I thought nothing of it. When I awoke, this time in the morning, the wall hanger was on the ground, shattered. I never had to deal with any sort of stabbing feelings again. I will never go back to that house again.
As a child, I used to live in a side-by-side, 2-family apartment. One day, I was like 7, my brother was 6, a few of our friends were over, roughly the same age, and were playing tag. The layout of the apartment is as follows. Pretty much straight through. Not real separation between rooms on the first floor. Living room, dining room, kitchen, in that order if you're looking to the west, standing in the front doorway. The dining room is the largest room downstairs. Windows on the south wall allow one to see the street outside. On the north wall of the dining room, closer to the living room, was a door. Open the door, step through, turn left, and stairs to the second floor. The second floor, at the top of the stairs, right in front of you, was my parents' bedroom. Still at top of stairs, turn to your immediate left, the bathroom. Continue left around the banister, a hall. Halfway down the hall is another bedroom. At the end of the hall was the room shared by me and my brother. Just outside this room was an alcove which housed the door to the attic. Okay, so tag. Not fun anymore, but I was 7, so I was like, hell yeah. It's 10:30 at night, sometime in July, summer vacation, no set bedtime. We're playing. I come out of the kitchen into the dining room, open the door to the stairs, and trip over a shoe. I'm not sure why my parents decided we'd keep the shoes at the bottom of the stairs, I just know they did. I pick myself up, and as quietly as I can, I charge up the stairs. At the top, I grabbed the banister with my left hand and used it to swing around into the hall. Now here's the fun part. I'm looking towards my bedroom, and to the best of my knowledge, no one had been upstairs all night. Yet, here I was looking at my bedroom, door open, light on, and there is this thing. Had to have been 10 to 12 feet tall, looked like a skeleton, wearing some kind of weird armor that covered its pelvis, shoulders, wrists, shins, and feet, and had horns coming from the side of its head and coming to an outward point just above its eyes. I said skeleton, but at the same time it was kinda see-through, like a ghost. I'm still running around the corner when I see this thing, get this, sitting on my bed. I kept running towards my room, but my torso had stopped all forward progress. I wind up falling backwards onto my back and neck, effectively losing sight of this thing. I got up real fast, and it was gone. The light was off, too, and I stood for a few minutes, staring at my room. Needless to say, I lost tag that particular evening.
When I was young, I pissed my dad off. Since we lived down the street from a cemetery, he drove my sister and I there and said he was going to have to tell the boogeyman that he'd have to take us away because we've misbehaved too much. So he gets out of the car and walks behind some building, and my sister and I hug each other and cry. He comes back and says that the boogeyman's mausoleum is full, but if we keep it up, he'd make room for us and come get us in our sleep. Dad reminded us every night. So one day my dad finds me eating a cigarette out of his ashtray and he says, in this passive voice, "Well, it looks like I'm going to have to tell the boogeyman about this." I spent the rest of the day waiting to die. Dad was gone because he was getting the boogeyman. So I go to bed with a nightlight on, and about 10 minutes after laying down, my closet door opens and a cloaked figure slithers out of it and says, "You should have listened to him," and I'm bawling my eyes out. It was obviously my dad, and he took the cloak off and apologized while laughing. I miss my dad. I just don't miss being 4. My mom divorced him a month or 2 later, and I was happy to leave that terrifyingly ambient house.
My parents bought their current house. One I lived in from age 8 till I moved out from a Mrs. Heinmen. Mr. Heinmen died the year before we bought the house, and Mrs. Heinmen was moving across town to a smaller one-bedroom place. Myself, an older sibling, and my mother have all seen the ghost of Mr. Heinmen in the house. Even to this day. Less of a haunting and more of a helping, really. He's warned us of potential dangers and has even occasionally popped up just to say hi, basically. First introduction was when he knocked on the bathroom door while my mother was taking a shower. While we were all away, and said might want to check the stove. The burner had been left on and a towel had just caught fire. Could have been a pretty bad house fire. I was home alone once, on my computer with headphones on and volume turned up, when the headphones flat out died on me. I look up, and he is standing by my door. Actually, in the door, he seems to have not gotten used to the additions we made as I put that door in myself and asked, "You know anyone drives a blue Cadillac?" before turning and walking out. I looked out the window, and sure enough there was a blue Cadillac parked behind a tree off the driveway, hidden from the road, and someone had just gotten out of it carrying a crowbar. We don't know anyone who drives a car like that. Opened the window and hollered out, "Go ahead and try, we're armed and won't be calling you an ambulance." He ran to his car and sped off. He sometimes just showed up in a window when we were outside and pointed at something we needed to know about. He really doesn't like to leave the house, only doing it once, and that was to tell my brother to get out from under a car moments before the jack stand broke. Freaked the hell out of us the first few times, but after a while we just got used to it. As much as one can get used to having a somewhat see-through old man randomly appear in their home. Always smells of cheap whiskey and tobacco smoke. When we redid the chimney, we found a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and an old corncob pipe tucked behind a loose brick. Had a string of dishes falling off the table. Even from the middle of the table for 3 days before we loosened up one of the new bricks and put it back. So he's fairly easy to get along with. My mom has tried to take a photo a couple times, once with a 35mm. The entire roll of film was blank according to the developer, and a digital camera. One that uses 3.5 discs, the disc was permanently fried. Couldn't even reformat the thing.
Here's a story for you. Backstory first. My grandma had passed away last year, around February. My folks and I were cleaning out her house and moving some furniture to our place. I took 2 dressers and some lamps for my room. Now our house is 26 years old. We built it brand new and moved in when I was 2, haven't had any reason for it to be haunted since, until recently. Now the summer of last year, that's when the weird shit started. I'm sitting at my desk in the dark watching TV, one little desk lamp is on, that was it. The touch lamp that was in my grandma's room turns on to the highest setting around 10:30, I didn't think much of it at first. The next night, it happens again, around 11 this time, and the following morning while I'm getting up for work. This light turns on several times before I say okay, that's enough. Now the even weirder part. I've seen several times, a small framed figure in my room. My grandma was a short woman. Just one night ago I'm laying in bed and for some reason I woke up. I looked to my left and saw her standing there, but she wasn't foggy or misty like you'd think a spirit would be, she looked more glassy and clear. Well, I screamed and jumped up and turned the light on, then she vanished. So now I'm paranoid about sleeping in my room. I know my grandma wouldn't hurt me, but still she scared the shit out of me several times so far. I'll have more if the weirdness continues.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.